Today we continue our sermon series on the letter to the Ephesians. As you may remember from the previous weeks, the letter to the Ephesians was written by a follower of the Apostle Paul, and it was written back to a church or many churches in Ephesus, a place in Asia Minor. Now the point of this letter is to share about how this Christian community, this new Christian community, ought to live. And in today's portion of the text from chapter 5, we hear that we are to live as those who are wise. And what does that mean, according to the author? It means to make the most use of our time. To make the most use of our time. Our conversation today is we'll consider, what does that mean to make the most of our time? Now, I can imagine you know what I found when I Googled that. When I Googled making the most of our time, I found a list of things, of ways to be more productive with our time, more efficient with our time, to manage our time well, even ways to use our free time, which made me wonder if we're really managing our free time, is it really free? I've read a number of leadership books, of course, and very often they have chapters or entire books about the use of time, making sure that you use time wisely in meetings by having a detailed agenda and things such as that. Making the most of our time is so important that it's part of our culture of who we are. And usually what it means is to be efficient, to be productive with our time. One of the things that I've noticed is that because of our interest in saving time, there are a lot of life hacks or gadgets you can buy on Amazon these days just to save time. Now there was one that I read about a couple years ago, and it became so unpopular that I've actually seen it in stores, not only online, but in stores. And it's this gadget called the Hutzler 571. Anyone own a Hutzler 571? Well, here's the problem it's trying to solve. We all know how much time we spend slicing bananas, right? It's just so hard to get those slices the right width and equal across the banana. Well, the Hutzler 571 will solve that problem for you. It's a great way to save time, to help us make the most of our time. And what it is, it's a plastic yellow form about the size of a banana. And so you peel your banana and you use the Hutzler 571 and it slices your banana for you. Is that what the author of the Ephesians meant by making the most use of our time? Finding ways to save time so that we can be more productive? Well, another reading that we heard today from the book of Proverbs also talks about being wise and living a wise life. But the author of Proverbs seems to say something different. The author of Proverbs says that describes Lady Wisdom. And the way that Lady Wisdom uses her time is she serves as a host. And she prepares a meal. And she invites those around her to come to the table and to eat and to drink. Those who live wise make the most use of the time. But what does Lady Wisdom say? The best use of time is to sit at a meal, to eat and to drink. Some might consider that a waste of time. But Lady Wisdom calls us to come and be together. This week we heard the news of two prominent individuals who died. First, of course, is Aretha Franklin, and the second, Kofi Anan. I think I learned something from them as I heard stories about their lives this week, and something about how they made the most of the time that they had. So first of all, we have Aretha Franklin, who, as you probably know, grew up singing in her famous father preacher's church in Detroit. Reverend Franklin was well known for his preaching style, he even had albums of his sermons that people were relished listening to. Well, Aretha, his daughter, sang in church. And probably one of the more famous early recordings of Aretha Franklin was from 1956, when Aretha was 14 years old. And in that recording, she sings Precious Lord. Now we have that song, that hymn in our hymnal, Precious Lord. I don't know how many verses. I think it may have 4 verses, and usually when we sing it, we sing it straight through. Verse 1, verse 2, verse 3, verse 4. That's not the way Aretha Franklin sang it. Aretha Franklin was known for her gospel music style. And one of the wonderful things I think about gospel music, and I'm not a musicologist, but one of the things that I appreciate about gospel music is its sense of time. Its sense of time, meaning that I don't know when it will end. Aretha sings these beautiful riffs that go all over the scales and comes back, and I don't know how the musicians know when to come back in again. So as a listener, all I can do is sit and appreciate and worship God, taking that time to be there, to be present in that very moment, not anticipating at all when it will end, because I will not know, but taking that time to worship God as I am sitting there at that moment. Aretha Franklin and her music had a way of helping us make the most of our time. The other person I was thinking about this week was Kofi Anan, who was the Secretary General of the United Nations. And I heard a piece on NPR this week from a Ghanaian reporter. Kofi Anan was Ghanaian himself. He was the first African Secretary General of the UN. And with such pride in her voice, she talked about his life. And what this reporter said is, you know, Kofi Annan won the Nobel Peace Prize. But there was a lot of criticism about some of the things that he said. And she said there was some criticism when he criticized the United States and Britain for their entry into the Iraq War. Back in 2003, what Kofi Annan said is he thought that they should have taken more time. When Kofi Annan was talking about making more time, he was saying that they should have negotiated more, talked some more, taken more time before the decision to go to war. For Kofi Annan, in the work between nations of peacemaking, making the most of time was important. So what do you think of when you think of making the most of your time? Wisdom says to take the time at a table, to eat and drink, not necessarily to be productive, not necessarily to be as efficient as you can with time, but to take time in relationship. One of my favorite movies of all time was Cheaper by the Dozen. It's based on a book by the same name, and it's about Frank and Lillian Gilbreth. And they had a dozen children, 12 children. And the book was written by 2 of the children. And they described their father. And what he did for work, he was what was called an efficiency expert. So the book talks about all the inventions he had, the hacks he had, just to save time. That was his passion, to save as much time as possible. Well, at the end of the book, his 2 children asked him a question. They said, "But Father, what are you saving time for? What are you going to do with that time?" That is the question we're asked today, isn't it? When we make the most of our time, what are we going to do with that? Now, the church has a word for setting time apart. Sometimes we call it Sabbath time. Time that is set apart especially for God. Aretha saw that as time set apart for worshiping God through music. Kofi and Anan saw that as setting time apart for conversation, negotiation for the sake of peace. This week I invite you to consider how you spend your time. Are you making the most of your time? And what does that mean for you?